Welcome back to our free ISO training. This week, we're going to look at how we gain top management commitment to our management system. Okay, we're IRM Systems. You can see our website there if you want to get in contact with us or see what we do. The focus of today's session is really a challenging part of a management system to say if we're in the middle there, developing a management system to meet ISO requirements, how do we get top management commitment? We know there are express requirements. There's a whole section in the different ISO management system standards, whether it be for quality or asset management or food safety or safety, for example. There's a whole section, section 5, on requirements or clauses relating to the roles and responsibilities of top management. So how do we get them on board, understanding what we're doing, why we're doing it, and getting their support? Okay. So we're going to start looking at that area. What are ISO's expectations around top management? We're going to have a brief look at a complex topic, organisational culture. We obviously can't cover every element of that today. We're going to, point number 3, we're going to look at 2 elements in more detail. What we mean by perception and shared beliefs around our management system. And we're going to talk about the concept of framing as a strategy to use if we need to change some of the shared beliefs, particularly of top management, as to what our system is for and what we're trying to achieve. And we'll give you some examples of that. So yes, if you're familiar with the ISO management system standards, you've probably seen this diagram on the right where it shows that management system model, and smack bang in the middle, section 5, here's some requirements for top management or leadership within our organisation. If you follow the history, as those ISO standards get revised, ISO always seems to up the ante on what's required of top management. Okay, so yes, for an effective management system, we're going to need to get senior management understanding what they're expected to do. Better still, if we can get them understanding and committed to Welcome back to this week's free training, ISO training. We're going to look at how we gain top management commitment to our management system. We're IRM Systems. There's our website if you want to contact us or see what we do. So yes, if you're in that middle position there, you're developing a individual management system, perhaps a quality management system or an integrated management system. So it's got safety, information security, environment, as well as quality elements, for example. And you're starting to work through the standards, you realise there are some express clauses and requirements relating to the role of top management. So we're going to need to educate them on that. Better still if we get them on board in terms of understanding why their role is so important. I'll say it right at the start. I'll try not to repeat myself too much. In our 20 years consulting in this area and working in this area, conducting audits, it's the number one success factor for an effective management system is management commitment, without a doubt. I'll promise to not repeat that more than 15 times through the presentation, because it becomes more and more apparent the further you develop your system. So the things we're going to look at today, what are the expectations from ISO in the standards around top management? We're going to introduce and have an introductory look at organisational culture. A complex topic that we're not going to be able to cover today. We'll look at it at an introductory sense. 2 elements of culture is, well, for a particular work group, what are their perceptions or shared beliefs? In our context, what are their shared beliefs around our management system, particularly of top management? And we're going to talk about framing as a strategy we can use if the shared beliefs aren't where we need them to be. And we'll give some examples of why that's so important. Okay. So yes, if you've started to look at those ISO management system standards, you will see that in all of them, there's a section 5 right in the middle there with requirements around the roles, responsibilities, accountabilities of top management. So as a bare minimum, we're going to have to educate our top management as to what those requirements are and how they can meet those requirements. Better still if we can get their buy-in, support, and get them understanding why their role is so important in the kind of performance we want to achieve out of our system if they're really committed to it. And we'll talk about that more as we go through. On the right-hand side, within that section 5, a couple of common clauses there, 5.1 to 5.3 in all of the ISO management system standards. Yes, got to set roles, responsibilities, and authorities, for example. 5.4 in the safety standard, 45001, highlights that, yes, it's a top management requirement to ensure there's effective mechanisms for consultation and participation as well. Now, we're going to talk about organisational culture. As we've said already, it's complex. It's sometimes hard to define exactly what it is, but you can see there's a little bit of this middle layer that sits between this management system you're trying to develop and perhaps the beliefs of top management as to what it's all about. Okay, that's broadly what we're going to be talking about in this section. Interestingly, organisational culture, or the term culture, is it mentioned in the different standards? Yes, in ISO 9001, the quality standard, it gets a brief mention, not in a clause or a requirement, but just in a guidance note to one of the clauses, 4.1. We can see in the asset management standard 55,001, information security standard 27,001, the term culture is not mentioned at all. It's mentioned in the environmental standard twice, but only in the guidance annex. It's interesting in ISO 45001, the safety standard, it is mentioned directly in a number of clauses, 5.1, 6.1, 10.3, 5.1J, for example, are saying a top management accountability is to lead and promote a culture that supports the intended performance of the safety system. Interestingly, in the definitions of that standard, they don't define exactly what they mean by culture, and it is hard to define. In the guidance, the Appendix A, they offer some guidance as to how culture, what it's determined by, what it's the product of, etc., without exactly defining it. Broadly, there's decades of research around organisational culture, and yes, it's hard to define, but personally, I find it probably reflective, I guess, of perhaps the worldview or lens applied by the ISO committees as to, they're developing standards, for example, as to requirements for safety performance within an organisation. And, only just starting to introduce culture as any important influence on that, when in reality, it's a major influence on the performance you'll achieve, your safety performance you will achieve in that example. So, yeah, from someone who's worked with standards for a while, also, that just seems to be, I'm glad it's creeping in, but it's taken a long time as well. Now, organisational culture, yes, there's a wide range of literature and research into that over several decades. Yes, it's a little abstract in the sense that it's easy to get a feel for or sense. It's more and to talk about but it's a little bit harder to define within an organisation. And it works, we get a sense of it both consciously and unconsciously, particularly getting a sense for, you join a new organisation, you'll get a sense for the culture. Some of that will happen unconsciously. Okay, so there's many researchers in this area, just a small sample. So Edgar Schein, a couple of things he highlighted was that culture is really, it's not uniform across an organisation. It's really a series of microcultures or subcultures across different groups and etc. Another important, he's got a concept that talks about shared beliefs. It's actually within his definition of organisational culture, which is long-winded. One element that he talks about there is the shared beliefs of a group, and that's a concept we'll come back to today. We're going to start to think about the shared beliefs of our top management as to what the purpose of our management system and what we have it for. Other authors there, Cameron and Quinn introduced this competing values framework. It's a great little tool to help us identify where we're at now as an organisation, what our focus is, how we function, give insight into our current culture right now. And that can be important in the framing and communication we use when we're developing our system and trying to educate others as to what it's about. You could even consider that in the design of your system. Two examples, I mean, they talk about a hierarchical organisation where there's rules, regulations, controls around efficiency, etc., versus an adhocracy in the top right corner. That's just two examples, which is an entrepreneurial kind of organisation where they value creative thinking, change, adaptation. You can see that the design of the management system in the two organisations may need to be quite different, and to introduce a management system that's quite hierarchical and rules and regulations focused is not going to work that effectively in an adhocracy. Throwing that up there, we're moving through this pretty quickly. It's something I rarely see organisations thinking about. Often, 99% of times, the focus when an organisation is developing a management system is, well, what are the requirements of the standard? What documents, forms, registers, etc., do we need to meet those requirements? That's reasonable, and you do need some focus on the requirements because obviously you want to conform, but you are also then going to try and implement the management system within an existing culture and subcultures within your organisation, which is quite challenging. So to start to think about your culture early on is really important. Other authors, so Dr. Rob Long introduces a great little visual metaphor to help understand the complexity of organisational culture. Culture is a cloud. I'll give you a reference to where you can go and have a look at that if you like, a useful tool. He's also got a risk maturity matrix. One of the key things he highlights in there is that, yes, systems are important building block in your risk maturity, but to advance your risk culture and maturity, you really need to start to understand people, how they make decisions and choices, what motivates them, etc. And that's a complex area, but you're going to need to go beyond just the documents and the systems to get, if you really want to excel and get excellent outcomes from your management system and improve your risk maturity. Now, we're coming back to this concept of shared beliefs that Edgar Schein talked about. And we're going to refer to, really should say at the top there, what are the shared beliefs of top management about our management system and why we're doing it. And I've probably got some negative examples there. So if I'm CEO of your organisation and I perceive this as, well, my belief is this safety system is not really my job. I'm just going to delegate it to you. I don't want too much to do with it. Well, you can imagine the top management support's not going to be that great, and yes, it will impact on what you achieve. Again, if it's perceived as just a certificate on a wall, or we need to be certified for a tender, I mean, that's okay. That's to be certified for business reasons is quite common, but if you want to get more value out of your system, we're going to talk shortly about how you can start to reframe some of this, try and influence those beliefs. If it's just seen as paperwork or the end goal is just compliance, then don't expect more than just compliance, obviously. I've popped that one up there because I do work with organisations who've had a management system for 5, 6, 7 years, and they say we're not getting much value out of it. And when you start to work through that and look back at, well, what are you aiming for? What are your beliefs around what it's about? Well, it's just about compliance to a standard. Well, don't expect to get any more than that then. Okay. Something that's quite challenging is, well, how do we identify or start to understand, well, what are the current shared beliefs of top management around our management system that we're trying to develop and our purpose for developing that and what we're trying to achieve. That can be hard to identify. There's no foolproof black and white method where we will get 100% accurate assessment. But I should have listed, so conversations can be important. So engaging those leaders in your organisation, start to talk to them. More importantly, and it should be right at the top there is the last point, listening to them. People do start to disclose and give you little giveaways as to what their beliefs around the management system and the purpose of it are. I've got observations there as well. Sometimes, yes, the observations do highlight times where what's being stated is different to the actions, leaders actually undertake as well can highlight those discrepancies. But particularly listening, if you listen carefully, and it's a skill beyond just, actively listen for what people are disclosing, leaders are disclosing in terms of their beliefs around or perception of the management system. Through that kind of process, again, it can take time, it's not foolproof, but if we start to get the sense that, yes, our top management do have beliefs that are where we need them to be in terms of they're likely to be highly supportive of what we're doing and why we're doing it and what we want to achieve, fantastic, you're very lucky. That's probably less common than it should be. And I have got colleagues who, had similar presentations, and they're saying at that point, if top management not on board, get a different job is their view, because it's very, very, it's the number one success factor in the kind of outcomes you'll achieve out of your management system. But if it's not where we want it to be, how can we influence their perception and beliefs as to what it's all about? And we're going to look at one strategy for that shortly, which is, right now, it's a framing. So what do we mean by framing? There's an excellent book by Gail Fairhurst, Power of Framing. I've got a reference to it at the end. It's really broadly about effective communication to leaders, going beyond just here's some words or what we want to communicate, to how can we shape their perception as to what it's all about as well. What language and how can we frame things to highlight the importance of this? Is it just to get a certificate so we can apply for a tender, or can we frame it as something more than that? If we frame it as something more than that, we influence their beliefs, we'll get better top management commitment, you'll get better results. Okay, a starting point both Fairhurst and also Edgar Schein point to is understand your own shared beliefs or your own view of reality, because that'll shape your communication, but also the shared beliefs if you're working in a project team as well. Because obviously if it's shared beliefs it's just about certification and that's the end point, then again, you'll obviously influence senior management that way as well. Now, it's labouring this a little bit, but it's really important when you're first developing your system to think about that language and framing, because one thing Schein points out is once those beliefs as to what is this system all about, why are we doing it, what's the purpose, etc., once they're set within a work group, including top management, very hard to change, notoriously hard to change. As I said earlier, it's something I see a lot of organisations not thinking about when they're developing the system. They're all focused on the paperwork and forms required. Really important to start thinking about, well, how do we frame this? What language do we use? How do we frame the importance of this management system and what we're trying to achieve early on so that we influence those perceptions and beliefs of top management before they're kind of solidified, okay? So here on the left-hand side, if probably not negative's not the right way to frame it, but if it's just seen as being about the paperwork, or it's just about compliance, or it's just about getting a certificate on a wall, as you can imagine, the top management buy-in and the outcomes are not going to be fantastic. And I do need to acknowledge, yes, we need some focus on what's required to conform to the standard, obviously, and some focus on certification. Don't make that the only end goal, though, okay? It's often the goal right at the start, but you've got this unique little opportunity before beliefs are set to highlight that, yeah, it's about conformance, but it's more than that. It's our framework for providing a safe workplace, or it's our framework for improving, or it's our framework for excellence in meeting customer needs, something like that. If you start to influence beliefs that way, you're going to get a lot more top management support. Some examples there. I mean, the first one, I've sat with management team in an organisation talking about what they needed to do to implement their management system, develop their management system, and the compliance manager saying to the top management team, well, we need to do this because the auditors expect it. Now, that's one way of framing it, and yes, that person's focus was on conformance at that point, which is reasonable, but it's not particularly motivating. You're going to be influencing their shared beliefs potentially to say, well, that's the end game as well. And not necessarily going to get a whole lot of buy-in. And yeah, I do acknowledge we'd have to have some focus on at that point that we need to meet a standard and the requirements in the standard, and certain evidence is required for conformance. But I will reiterate, it's some of the framing you can introduce it's more than that. If I'll look at some better examples in a moment, might get you more support, buy-in, etc. So some of the other ways we could frame it is to frame it in terms of our reputation as an organisation, or I'll show you an example shortly that ties the first two in together. As in, frame it as us being an industry leader or a leader in our industry can motivate top management attention. If we frame it in the context of failing to maintain the kind of safety performance or environmental performance we need, could have impact on our ability to operate. Yes, if we're a site with a license from an environmental regulator and we lose it due to poor performance, then that can actually affect our ability to operate. So yes, let's frame our management system as our framework for making sure that doesn't happen. Or say, I'll tie the next two together, we're developing a quality system rather than just we're doing this to meet the requirements of a standard. This is about developing clear processes so we've got a sustainable business, or it's about ensuring we achieve excellence in meeting our customer needs. Again, things that are going to be seen as more important and likely to get more management buy-in. You could frame it in the context of cost saving, regulatory implications are covered, but even, that context of it's about providing a safe workplace or improving our competitiveness, something like that. It's just going to get you further than just simply framing it as conformance to the standard is the end game or the end goal. Now, there's a little bit of psychological research out there, or quite a bit actually, that highlights that if we frame things in a way that it's a gain or a benefit to an organisation, it gets more traction or buy-in than avoiding a loss, so a loss frame. So put it in terms of, well, how does this benefit the organisation? A couple of examples of the framing that have really changed things that I've seen. So one is a international management consultancy I've done some work with. They've got an environmental management system. They got reasonable environmental performance out of that over a number of years. It ticked along, never getting much better than that. They had the realisation that they weren't perceived as a leader in their industry, but in environmental performance and sustainability, particularly by their customer base. They did get a new CEO who came in. One of the first things she articulated was kind of a new vision and commitment around sustainability from the top, and framed it as something critical for the business going forward, a critical business, I can't think of the right word at the moment, a critical business pillar almost, if you like, as one of the first things she articulated. And the point I'm trying to make is, yes, it totally kind of transformed the environmental performance from reasonable to outstanding is the journey they're now on. Okay, second one's a port authority I did some work with, working with a project team. We were developing what we were starting to articulate to work groups as an integrated management system. Didn't seem to get much buy-in or traction. Decision was made internally by the project team to rename it as something more meaningful to the work groups. There's a little competition held. Someone came up with the term the compass, which is almost has symbolically reflects kind of guiding processes within that kind of industry. And just amazing the way that transformed the perception of the IMS as something nothing to do with me. That's something that project team is doing to, this is about the guiding processes for our team. Much, much better buy-in at all levels. That's just two examples. We have covered some complex concepts today. I should just show you the last slide. That's some of the references I've been talking about as we were particularly talking about culture. The second one there, Dr. Rob Long, one of his key texts, Risk Makes Sense. That's actually a free download if you are looking, a key piece of work if you're looking at what's required to go just beyond systems into developing real risk maturity in your organisations. as a free download, but the other one's important there as well. Hope you've enjoyed today. Talking about some important stuff for the effectiveness of your management system. Thank you.